This I'll introduce her as Carrie Underwood. Okay. Carrie Underwood, but she reminds me a lot of Carrie Underwood. So very energetic. And, Carrie is one of our lead teachers, district lead teachers, and she does a lot of training for us. Now we are not state trainers, so what we're doing today, we will not certify you as a team evaluator. To use the team model in evaluations, you have to go through the Tennessee Department of Education evaluation training for the teacher model. Carrie is the person that when we are wanting to build capacity in a building, when we're going beyond the basic training and really talking about how we're going to use the team to build capacity, we focus on the instructional practice in a building. She is that person that goes and works with the administrator and our lead teachers in that building. So in Knox, we have the principal and assistant principals who do the evaluations, and then we have lead teachers in the building who do the evaluations. And the lead teacher is one that is a high performer who also has some mentoring skills, that kind of. Also participate in doing evaluations. So every teacher will not necessarily have an evaluation from a lead teacher, but that's an important part. And Carrie and 3 others are responsible for doing all that, doing that training. So she is, if you want to talk about a guru, she is a guru, and you'll see that today as she leads you through some. My job is I'm Director of Human Capital Strategy, and so part of that is the evaluation process falls under that. And so the grievance procedures, and also if there is an evaluation grievance, then that comes to me as the initial stage, and I help guide the principal in their response on the front end. So the stakes on all this has raised greatly, and it's really it was a significant shift for our teachers, because what we had was what most places had in education prior to TEAM. We had a minimalist model. In other words, if you met the minimum expectations, whatever the expectations were for teaching, essentially, then you got the highest score. And pretty much, you looked around, that was pretty characteristic around the country. So it wasn't a growth model. The team evaluation is a growth model. So meeting expectations is at a level 3, and you're going to see it's a 5-point scale. And that leaves levels 4 and level 5 above and significantly above expectations that teachers are always working toward. So that was a real shift, because teachers were used to getting all above expectations, or it really wasn't worded that way. They were given letter grades, essentially, and they were used to getting really high scores. And so TEAM comes along, and that is, now they're seeing 2 E's, and that was a real shock. So it's taken us a few years to get to the point where that's somewhat smoothed out, and we're not having as much, you don't hear as much about that anymore. But we'll be talking about I'm going to give a quick team overview, then we're going to dive right into the rubric, and we're going to do some instructional activities and kind of let you all do the work today. So you're going to be actively engaged. But the NIAT was the original for developing the team rubric back in 2002, 2003. I made several trips out to Arkansas and met with the folks at NIET and attended some conferences, and we at the TAP model at that time. And so in Tennessee, Knox County was the first to bring this model into the state, and we began with 4 schools as TAP schools. Now the TAP rubric is very similar to this, but you will not, if you have worked with any of the state models of recent, since all the reform movements and everything, this is not going to be really anything different to you. You look at Virginia, you look at Kentucky, all of these things all these models are very, very similar. Georgia now, they're all very similar to this because they're built off of Charlotte Danielson's research and work that she's done. And then NIET also used several other groups to help them in developing the process. Just so you know how, for our teachers, what goes on. If you have a professionally licensed, if you're a professionally licensed teacher, there are 2 annual observations. So you're going to have, the first one is going to be planning and instruction, and then there's going to be one environment and instruction. And then if you're an apprentice teacher, which that is now changing to practitioner, the label will be practitioner going forward. If you're a practitioner licensed teacher, then that means in your probationary period, years 1 through 5, you are going to, or I should say years 1 through 3, you're going to have 4 annual observations, and the planning and instruction, in our system, the only standalone that we do is environment. Now, in the state material, you will hear them, their model sometimes will show planning as the standalone. That doesn't make any sense to us. Our team, TAP task force, studied that, and we felt like that environment, going in and looking at a teacher's environment, was a better standalone than planning. If you're going to evaluate planning, when you look at this rubric, you'll understand this. You really ought to go ahead and do evaluate the instruction, because to use the planning rubric with team and TAP, you have to also observe the lesson. The evaluation process, and this is all grievable. This is if the procedures must be followed. So there has to be an initial coaching conversation, and this is required of all teachers at the beginning of the year. If a teacher is at level 1, either in growth score or level of effectiveness, which is the overall score that they get, then they have to have a different level of coaching. But that is a required piece. The coaching conference is required of all level 1 teachers. Then for every observation that occurs in our district, teachers get a pre-conference if it is announced. Unannounced, obviously, you're not going to have a pre-conference. But announced observations would involve a pre-conference. Then there's the classroom visit, and then after the classroom visit, the post-conference must happen within 5 days. So once you complete an observation, the clock begins to tick, unless either the evaluator or the teacher is out. It's 5 working days, and that post-conference must be completed. If it is not, it's a procedural violation, and the score can be challenged, or the evaluation can be challenged. Then at the end of the year, when you reach the final month, typically in May, our teachers also will have a summative conference, or a end-of-year conference, where they will receive their observation scores, the total observation summative score, and also a professionalism score. So the professionalism is only 4 indicators, and the number of indicators matter. So it's not weighted very much, but it's important. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well as we get into this. But today we're going to really focus in on the environment. We're going to focus in on planning, and of course the big piece, the centerpiece of what we do is instruction, as you'll see here. So environment, planning, and professionalism, they all certainly support and are an important part of this with the instruction, but at the core of what we do are the children, and it's the instruction that is going to impact them. Yes, and let me just go ahead and give these. You may want to have some notes that they want to take. So here are in the planning domains, we look at the instructional plans. And these are just the key categories when we talk about this. So the planning domain has instructional plans, student work, and assessment. The environment is made up of 4: managing student behavior, expectations, how the teacher setting high expectations, environment, and also respectful culture. And that is really an important one as well that maybe hasn't been in some of the other evaluation models. Instructional domain, as you will see, it is the most significant area. Standards and objectives, and you will hear Carrie will tell you that there are some of these that are more significant, but this is a holistic model. So we don't just zero in on standards and objectives and make it a checklist. We're looking at this holistically, and today we'll talk a little bit about how things such as academic feedback and questioning are connected, thinking and questioning, how they relate, those kinds of connections that really make this a very strong model. In our system, we have found, now we've been using this for 12, 13 years. It is neutral as far as program. It is neutral in terms of what style of teacher you are. All of those things really don't matter. So you can go in and you can have the teacher that is as traditional as all get out. And this model, in terms of being able to give a fair evaluation and really get at good teaching, you can use it for that. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on these kinds of things. I do want to know, how many of you have been trained by TDOE? Any of you had the Tennessee Department of Ed? I know Steve has. Anyone else? All right. So if you've been through that, training, then you certainly know some of these things. But being exposed to this rubric is not enough. Just taking it, having a little bit of exposure to it, even if you've got just incredible knowledge about instruction. This thing requires you to actually spend some time practicing, using it, and you will hear that from her today as well. It's not a checklist. As I've said earlier, it's used holistically. Just being exposed to it's not sufficient for full fluency. Fluent use of the rubric uses student actions and discussions and understanding that what we're looking at is not always what the teacher is doing, but we're looking at what students are doing in that classroom. And so that is another thing that is a shift from the old Tennessee evaluation system that did not have much of that kind of thing in it. But this is full of that, and being an important part of what we're evaluating that teacher on. We'll learn how to use it through practice, and using it multiple times, you improve. So the whole system is built around the idea that you will spend that time practicing, growing, using the system, and co-observing. So we do a lot of co-observing in our district. We want people going in and seeing, am I seeing this, using this rubric, am I seeing this like my principal? As a whole evaluation team, when they see instruction being delivered, are they seeing it in the same light? And so we spend a lot of time on calibrating, because that is how, if teachers feel like, oh, well, if I get this person, then my score is going to be higher than if I get this person. Or this person scores harder. Now, can you find that? Can you hear that out there? Absolutely. Margie knows it's in probably Blount County as well. That's part of it. You're going to have some of that, but our goal is to as much as possible to minimize that by having people observe and then really looking at our inter-rater reliability. So we spend a lot of time looking for outliers and addressing those outliers when we see them. Yeah.
I worked at Auschwitz. They actually
Uh-huh.
as an instructional model in their clusters. And in my opinion, that's why there's been so much negativity across the state.
Uh-huh.
Some people just 30 minutes at a faculty meeting and then expect the teachers to
Yeah.
comprehend.
Yeah, that goes back to what I was saying. If you handle it that way, it will be a monster. So I think that's very true. So we'll be looking at the team rubric. It is built on a 1, 3, 5 scale, and then based on how you can, if you're above a 1 but you're not quite there to the 3, then you have the ability. The evaluator has the ability to give a 2. Dr. Cook was talking about that there are some places where they've filled in the 2. NIAT would roll over at that. I mean, having that flexibility in there. There's a reason why we don't define precisely what a 2 is and what a 4 is, and that is to give that evaluator the ability to look at this instrument holistically and be able to use. There's still professional judgment in this, right? And so to make certain that it is not becoming just a checklist, that 2 and that 4 is not filled in with the idea that when you go in and you see good, you still have that ability to make some professional judgments and be able to say, this may not have all of what of the 2, but they're really the 5, but they certainly have the majority of everything. It's 3. They've got a lot of the 5. This person is above expectations. They're performing above expectations. And you have that ability as a professional to make those kinds of judgments.
So you did formally assign 2 and 4.
Yes. Yes, it is a 5-point scale with the 2 and the 4 not precisely defined. It allows you that freedom to do the right thing. Okay? So this is the parts, and I'm going to roll through this to get her started. Again, the name is the instruction domain, and then we look at the indicators for the highlighted area. The first one on the instructional rubric you will see will be standards and objectives. So the other part of this is, so we have the domains, now the indicator, and then these are the descriptors. So it is important, again, that they are just that. They are descriptors. So it doesn't mean that you really have to be careful, like when you get into grouping. It's not saying that every lesson should have group work. Some lessons, the most efficient and best way to deliver it is whole group. That is a type of grouping. And so it meets the standard. The question is, why did you do it? So does the teacher know their students and are able to articulate, this is why for this lesson I am grouping my students this way. So those kinds of little things are really important to know. And then the performance levels, as I said, we have those in 3 levels. And with that, we're going to get started in doing the serious work. That was just a quick overview of just the total model. And by the way, this portion in a teacher's evaluation, what we're looking at today is 50% of the teacher's evaluation if they have an individual growth score. If they do not generate an individual growth score, in other words, they do not have a portfolio assessment, or they do not administer an end-of-year course test, or TCAP, then it counts 60%. Okay, so those folks, 60% of their evaluation score comes from the observation. With that, 30. If you have a test, or like kindergarten portfolio assessment, first grade portfolio assessment, fine arts, or the TCAP test, that counts 35%, and your achievement score counts 15% of your teacher evaluation. If you do not have an individual growth score, then it is 25% the building level growth score, and still 15% achievement. But the observation piece goes up to 60%.
A rubric and a highlighter, and we, like Rodney said, we're going to be very engaged in the rubric today and in the process. Yes. Okay, so we're going to dive into the instructional rubric. And one of the most important things, I think, when you first start using the rubric is to really dive into the language of what the rubric is really saying. And so we're going to look at what are the teachers doing, what are students doing, and what is the expectation that's happening. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through standards and objectives. Like Rodney said, this is the one that we kind of start with. Everything's connected to standards and objectives. So I'm going to start with standards and objectives, and you can do this as I'm kind of talking through it. But in my mind, I'm going to talk to you about why I think certain parts are important for me to remember as an evaluator, or if I was in the classroom as a teacher who was having to practice this rubric. Okay? So, kind of far away, I think. All right, so we're going to look at the first row, and I'm going to be working through the add expectation right in the middle of the instructional rubric for this activity. We're looking at that first line, that first descriptor that says most learning objectives are communicated, connected to state standards, and referenced throughout the lesson. So when I'm thinking through that first descriptor, I'm trying to figure out what's most important for me to know. And so I went ahead and highlighted these words. The first thing that is important for me to know, it's most learning objectives. It doesn't say all. So most objectives, they have to be communicated, and they have to be connected to my standards, and they have to be referenced. Yes. So it's not just written. I need to communicate that to my students. So my students should know what we're learning. There shouldn't be any question. You could have it posted, but you would want to make sure that when you're communicating it to them, that they know. So as a teacher, I would want to say it. Sometimes I'll see teachers have the students repeat it back to me or summarize it and put it in their own words.
That's a really great example.
Mm-hmm.
You take a teacher that does not post it, still method the same. Right? So there are districts that will say you must have your objective posted. They'll say because the team rubric requires it, but it doesn't. It does not require that you post the standards. And posting and communicating are two very different.
As a,
You have a
Right. As a teacher, I always had mine posted because it reminded me to make sure that I was communicating it to my students, but it's not required like Rodney said. The other thing I want to point out, that it has to be done throughout the lesson. So if I state it at the beginning and I have my students repeat it, that doesn't mean that I've done it throughout the entire lesson. So we want our kids to be able to repeat back to us multiple times throughout the lesson. This is what we're learning, and this is why we're learning it. This is why it's important. All right, if I go to the next descriptor, we're looking at those sub-objectives now. And the things that I see are important. I don't know why this is clicking twice, but things that I look at, and when I look at it, I think these are important things for me to remember, are that we're just talking about sub-objectives at this point. And most importantly, if I have a sub-objective, it needs to be aligned to the major objective. Now, not every lesson will have sub-objectives. So when we're talking with teachers, we want them to understand, again, this is not a checklist. It's not saying that you have to have sub-objectives in your lesson. But if you have sub-objectives, then obviously they need to align to whatever that main objective is for your lesson. The next one is the learning objectives are connected to what students have previously learned. So when I look through that, the most important words for me, we're talking about the objectives. And what about the objectives? Well, they're connected to previous learning. This really builds on the relevancy that you'll see all through the instructional rubric. We want to make sure that our learning is relevant to students, not just what they see outside of school and in their daily lives, but what they've previously learned in school. All right, the next one, expectations for student performance are clear. Thank you. So what I see is important in this one is that I'm talking about expectations. And then what about the expectations? Well, I'm not just looking for general expectations. I'm looking for expectations related to student performance, and that those expectations are clear. And not just clear for me as a teacher, but the students should know what their expectations are too. And that goes back, again, to communicating that objective for students. And then the last one, there's evidence that most students demonstrate mastery of the daily objective that supports significant progress toward mastery of a standard. Now, this one has changed slightly since Team First was introduced. And one of the things that has changed is that bottom part where it says that it's supporting significant progress toward mastery. Because of the way that our standards are now written, we don't expect a teacher to teach 1 or 2 lessons on a standard and have mastery. That mastery comes at the end of the year after you've taught all year. So what we're looking at is, what's most important from this descriptor is that, first of all, you have evidence. And this is something we talk about with teachers all the time. You have to know, what are you looking for to know if those students have mastered it? And there has to be some piece of evidence. You can't just say, well, I know. If I were going to ask you what's your evidence, I would expect you to tell me, well, I was looking for these things on this assessment that I gave, or I was looking when I was walking around for these 3 points and I took anecdotal notes. We have to have some type of evidence to refer back to. Another key word is that most students, so it's not all students, but most students, they have to demonstrate the mastery on the daily objective. And then ultimately, that should show me how they're progressing toward mastery of the standard. We wouldn't expect that standard to be mastered in that one lesson. All right, so this activity that we just did, I'm going to have you do it on some of the other parts of the instructional rubric. So you're sitting next to, hopefully, another person that you can kind of shoulder up with and work together. But I want you to go through some of the other indicators, and I want you to highlight what you think are the key words. And we're just going to say right there in the center at the add expectation point. And so when you're looking through, I want you to ask yourself, first of all, who is it talking about? And then what is it telling them they should do? So just like we talked about, a lot of these are for the teacher. The teacher should communicate that expectation. The teacher needs to really plan for how that student's going to demonstrate. So you're going to highlight those key words. And in order for us to make sure we're hitting all the instructional rubric, if you're sitting on this half of the room, if you'll start at the end, start at problem solving and thinking and work backward. And if you're on this side, if you'll start at motivating students and just work down through the instructional rubric. And we're just going to take 15 minutes. And I'll be walking around, Rodney will be walking around if you have any questions about this activity. If you'll just start at thinking and problem solving, should be toward the end. Problem solving's right here, and then thinking's right here, and then you can just move up. On the last one, right, so some of them there is no difference, and then some of them there's just difference in one word. What is your name? Steve. Okay, so Steve just brought up a really good point. He said if you look at the last descriptor that we just talked about, there's actually no difference between that one and the 5, the significantly above expectation. And that's true. In this case, there isn't. But if you look at the top one, you'll notice there is a difference where it says most learning objectives, and then on the 5 it says all learning objectives. So sometimes it's literally one word that's different. You're looking at most students or all students.
We need additional direction.
Sure, I'm coming.
So we're supposed to start with problem solving.
Yes, yes, and then to,
Your content.
sure,
This one, okay.
yes.
And we'll end up,
You'll end up right back to where we started. You're welcome, no problem.
That's right. You're the words that what you're really looking for. What is it this indicator is really what's
Yes,
essential?
just the middle section, those important words that really stick out to you.
On level 3.
On level 3, that's correct. And you're working backwards. You're working back up the rubric.
okay, now then turn it over until we get to page 5. We're having problems. Just that rubric. Then we'll start here and go this way backwards, she said. Oh, okay.
Yep.
I'm gonna come around and face you, but are we supposed to do this individually first?
Just yeah, you can highlight and then just compare.
Morris. Sure.
Under 3, just 3.
Look what it says.
Absolutely. Sure. Sure.
There's a couple of those in there where it's the same.
There are. You're really looking at all, and then there's a big difference between the third one and even the fourth one because it
Yep.
goes into the
Yeah,
demanding.
but I just mean in other parts of the rubric,
Oh.
you know, where you run into where you'll have one little thing, especially, but between the 3 and the 5, because some things, I mean, you could say that there is strong evidence, but really why, you know, I kind of agree with them. Why do that?
Right.
Because that just adds more subjectivity.
It doesn't, and I think that's an argument that we always hear. Well, how do you know it's a 3 and not a 4?
Yeah.
How do you know it's a 2 and not a 3?
Yeah.
When I calibrate, I sometimes I'll write down a note to myself that this was like a high 2 or a low 3, because then when the lead teacher comes back and has either a 2 or a 3, then it's easier for me to.
And, you know, it's really easier to work with folks that don't know jack about it than it is with someone who's already, you know, they've kind of gotten off on the wrong foot and they already have their mindset, oh, well, this is a bad instrument or whatever.
I agree. I already have the baggage they're bringing
Yeah,
in.
yeah.
I figured they would not probably get through all of it in the 15 minutes, but I'm going to encourage them to continue this later. It's really about just diving into the language at this point. So we'll give them like 3 more minutes.
Once I got over that mindset,
Yeah, thanks, Keith.
how do you deal with the sometimes ones?
Like, for example,
If you don't see it, it's okay.
yeah, again, that is the significance of this in the sense that it is,
Right.
it is a
Got a lot of it
holistic
memorized.
rubric. And
I might not be able to
when we
quote
come
it word
back
for
to
word, but
if you
Yes.
you use some common
I know when I
sense
don't see
in it,
it.
you know, some professional judgment.
Yes.
You're sitting there, you're watching a really good lesson,
it takes practice though.
you don't necessarily see it.
It wasn't really
in
until I
the,
did it,
the practice
even at the building
today,
level.
but you can
I
see
tried to
that
plan with it and everything, and I still didn't feel as fluent in it as I do now that I do it every day.
professionally licensed,
And,
those who have 3 year,
multiple
greater
times
than
a day.
3 years
Right.
have 2.
Constantly.
And those that have, who are not professionally licensed or who are significantly below expectations, they have 4.
Yes.
The regular teachers
And I will say, after doing an observation, my brain hurts because you just
2.
are so intent on all that's going on and making sure that you're looking at everything holistically and yet making sure
That
all
is
those
the,
pieces are
that
there.
becomes the observation score, and the summative observation score includes the professionalism
Okay.
score as
So
well.
that way,
Yep.
if you didn't see it one time, but somebody saw it the next time, whoever's doing that summary would say.
Right,
that meant
right. And it's really just, it's really getting at just the effective lesson. So if if you are, what we pretty much find is teachers that are at 3 and above, that gives you, for the most part, it gives you individual growth scores of 4 and 5. But we really spend a lot of time trying to.
Great.
That's why we do so many co-observations and
We're going to do about one
calibration,
more minute. I know you probably are
in
not
this
finished, and that's
because of
okay.
that.
We
And
really
that's-
just want the
and that's really
conversation and really for
how
you to
we-
dive in a
that
little bit.
exemplary district.
Now, while we're gonna be exposing our folks to this, but you're not concerned all that much, because you're gonna train everybody you have to come through in your system, aren't you?
Right.
As whether they're a teacher or whether they're a leader.
Right. Yeah, they all get it. They all get it. Yep. I do think it is good. I think that for you all, that if you're teaching in the Tennessee section, or even around it, I mean, going through that TDOT training even, or TDOE training would be good.
I'm assuming can we send them the PowerPoint?
Yeah. If there's anything we need to protect on that, at the end of it, we can talk about that, but we can then turn around and send back if there's parts.
Okay. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on. Hopefully you had a chance to at least get through one or two of the indicators at a minimum. Some of you I saw got through the whole rubric, and some had some really rich discussion, so I think that's great. It doesn't really matter how much you got through. The goal of that was to get you into the language of the rubric and to see kind of what we're looking for when we're looking at a lesson. And hopefully that did that. Now, one of the things I want to draw your attention to, if you'll find the questioning and academic feedback part of the instructional rubric, it's kind of right in the middle. If you'll find those two indicators, and if you didn't get to them, it's not a big deal. But what I want you to do is take just a second, and I want you to look at those two indicators, and you can look at the 3, the 5, the 1, it doesn't matter. I want you to look at how the two of them are connected. So how would you say that the things that fall under questioning would support the things that fall under academic feedback? And this happens all through our rubric. So just take a minute, talk with your group, read through those things. You can go the whole way across if you want to. And so if I'm looking at questioning, how does that support also what happens in academic feedback?
Yep. Look for the connectors in those
How
two.
do they connect?
Between the two indicators, how they're interrelated.
Should be halfway through. Here's academic feedback, here's questioning.
Oh,
It's
okay.
kind of upside down, so you'll have to start here, and then the rest of it goes here. Questioning is a pretty big.
It's number 2.
Academic feedback and questioning.
So that's what
Yeah,
you're
it
looking
runs
at.
off.
How does this one and this one interrelate?
And the rest of it's up here.
You can look at, you are looking at them across. Yeah, you are looking at them across, but then you're looking at, yeah. Yeah.
Now, that questioning runs onto 2 pages, so there's kind of 2 sections of questioning.
You're editing this, right? I was thinking, Jack about it, and I mean that in a good way.
You're good. Edit out the workshop. I just let it go over so I have something to edit with. I'll drop it. So as soon as I get the PowerPoint from you, I'll drop it in the slides. And just,
Yeah, I can do that.
it'll be a good training element for them. They can refer back to it.
Yep. 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 Is that making sense? Do you see are you seeing connections?
Kind of.
Okay.
I mean, um, engaging students, I guess, is a connection I see. Questioning. This is supporting engagement and monitoring student work. That's what I see.
Okay.
Is there more?
And of course, I mean, and even in the questioning, it also leads to feedback, right? So,
Okay. Yeah,
you know, that,
Good questioning will give you that
right,
information to monitor and adjust.
that's it.
I think it just depends on the school. I do some adjunct work with Johnson University, and I know they use it a little bit, but not to the fullest extent. I know. I mean, it tells you best practices for sure. Mhm. Okay, so what were some of the connections that you saw? Let's just share them out loud real quick. What are some of the connections you saw between academic feedback and questioning? Okay, there's that whole engagement of student piece in there. What else? Right. So one of the things I think that has changed significantly with this instructional rubric that I've seen is the way that teachers question their students. So before, I would come into a lesson with 12 pre-planned questions, and it really didn't matter how my students answered those questions. Here were my 12 questions. I was going to make sure I hit all my higher order questions, and that feedback piece wasn't there. So a huge connection is we're not just saying, good job, you did a good job answering this, but when a student answers a question for me, I'm giving them the feedback that's academically focused, and I'm telling them exactly why what they said is either correct or how they need to adjust that answer to make it correct.
Sometimes it is just a follow-up of why. Why did you answer that way? I mean,
Absolutely. Yes.
That's it.
Yes.
That's it. But
Absolutely.
you're pushing into the evidence. It is a much deeper. It's a much deeper dive in the in the information, in the knowledge, in the skill than what was there previously. Why? Yeah.
Right.
You ask him, why is that? Why is that the best answer? Why are you saying that? They give you that feedback.
Absolutely, and it also ties into them defending their answers, because I might say to them, show me in the text what sentence helped you draw that conclusion. And so by me questioning them to even a higher level, it's going way past just the basic questioning. I can't pre-plan all those questions. So I'm listening to the feedback, or the answers I'm getting from students, and then I'm adjusting my feedback and my questions accordingly. And my feedback can be another question, or my feedback could be some kind of comment or statement, or prove it to me kind of statement. Another one.
Also forms our curriculum. I was sitting here thinking I got
Absolutely.
Yes. rubric can be very overwhelming if you see every descriptor as a different thing you have to do. So one of the biggest things we've had to work with teachers is looking for these connections. And by me really planning my questions and then being ready to provide that feedback, knowing what I'm looking for in student responses, I don't have to worry about making sure I'm hitting every single one of these descriptors. Another one, some of the groups were talking about the thinking indicator, and that one connects really tightly to presenting instructional content because it talks about that you thoroughly teach a type of thinking. Well, mostly that's going to be done through modeling of your thinking process. So the more that teachers see that all of these descriptors connect and link together, and by doing one, you're hitting other ones, it makes it so that it's easier for them to see this, oh yeah, this is great practice for me to incorporate into my classroom.
This is an important piece too as you get into this when we get to the point of identifying the refinement and reinforcement. All of this, having that knowledge is critical for the evaluator because it really makes the difference of whether you're able to identify the correct refinement and reinforcement.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we felt like one of the best ways for you to really get a chance to see what this looks like in practice is to actually observe a lesson. So we're going to do that. We're going to have you put on the hat of the evaluator. Here are a couple of things that we need to be aware of as evaluators under the team process. First of all, you'll be gathering evidence. And so in order for us to even get to the scoring part, you'll have to make sure that your evidence, that you have as much evidence as possible. So you're going to want to script dialogue that you hear. You're going to want to capture what the teacher says and does, but also what the students are saying and doing. And so we don't want to just focus on what was happening with the teacher. You want to make sure that as you're scripting or you're taking notes, that your notes are unbiased. So we're not using words like, I like the way they did this, or they did a good job doing this. But you're just capturing the evidence of what's happening. And then when you can, you want to copy word for word from visuals, the dialogue that they're having, and it's also, we think it's really important that you take time notes. So every once in a while, there's going to be a timer running at the bottom, and if you see a lesson transition, you might want to jot down what time that took place. And then we're going to come back to the rubric, and we're going to take some time to really look at the evidence that you collect, and then score that lesson. Are there any questions about that? And I picked the shortest lesson I could find, because most of them are like an hour and 20 minutes. So this one is a shorter 39-minute lesson. You can script it however you want. So if you have notes, you can take it on paper. If you have a computer, feel free to do it in a Word document. In our school district, we have an app and a mobile site that we use. So we type everything into an app on an iPad, and then through the app, we're able to categorize our evidence and score it.
You can, on the state website, there are documents, there are forms that you can use. So yes, a lot of places are still doing it paper, and then you can get access to those on the state website. But in reality, when you start doing the scripting, you may find that you prefer to do that part on paper. Because one of the things that's different than the old model, the scripting notes do not become part of the record that you provide teachers. So you provide them the evidence. There is a sheet where you capture the evidence for the scores, but you don't hand them, you do not give them the scripting notes. Now in our system, teachers have access to that by how we release it, but as far as what you will hear from the State Department in the training, they will tell you there's not a requirement to provide the scripting notes, and you do not have to keep them. We have just chosen, based on some things that I know about human resources law, we have chosen in Knox County to keep those. Yes, you will, and we can get that for you. Now, as I said, you're going to want, if you are going to have someone who's evaluating your student teachers on this, you will want those people to go through that team training, and that will occur in January. So this is and the reason I say that to you is this is a copyrighted contract, and it's a contract with the state of Tennessee. NIET will sue. So in terms of if you use this thing in outside of the bounds or outside of the guidelines, so you will want to be sure that that next round of training would be in January. I know Steve's been through it, and any of the others of you have been through it previously. Even if you've been through it, if you are going to use it to evaluate people officially, okay? So if it's going to impact their student teaching, and certainly like in our situation for personnel use, anyone who would be doing that would need to complete that training. In terms of yeah. So again, it also is about building capacity. So just the capacity to deliver great instruction. So it really is, because of the reflective practice that this thing pulls in, it really is about that teacher studying their own practice, their own craft in that classroom. Student learning. I mean, that is everything, and that's why all the student data piece and all that is all tied together. And so when you look at this whole instrument and why everything centers around instruction, at the heart of that instruction are students. It is totally data driven. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, one of the things that we do in our district, for example, and I know that the Appalachia, the group that works with LMU, the universities, the co-op, yeah, I think they do some of this as well. We do what we call the Team Tap Institute, and that is some teachers go willingly, some go reluctantly, but they go to these, and that is our district lead teachers oversee that. But we have classroom teachers who are like some of our strongest at questioning, and they actually lead the sessions on those and give that opportunity. So we do 24 of those in the fall and 24 in the spring. Yeah. Because they're not, they just, you pop into my classroom and do this. If you, now just so that you. I'm talking about how can teachers get ready for this? So they can improve themselves. Yeah. And I think we do a pretty good job of that. I mean, especially when you look at just the data. The state also offers through the 10 core offices. They offer a lot of training along this area that anyone, I mean, that's one of the things that we've seen. The state has closed the gap with us, Knox, in terms of before, there was a much wider gap before team came into play, because we were doing these kinds of trainings and doing this kind of support. And Steve can tell you, we've been doing it for a while. But now, something that wasn't happening in the state didn't, there wasn't a mechanism for Union County and Claiborne County to get access to some of this stuff. But now with the 10 core offices offering the same level, I mean, they've got the same, it's a different name, but they've got their own Carrie Morris's out there that's working with these districts. And so what we have seen now, our spread, even though we had the exemplary school district this year, when you look at our spread from the rest of the state, it's not nearly as great as it was prior to 2011. I mean, it is obvious that the state of Tennessee has greatly improved from where it was, and a lot of it comes from just this. So that training that they're offering, that they're providing, obviously people are taking advantage of it, and the 10 core offices is the heart of that. So rather than it just coming out of Nashville, somebody planning some workshop, they're doing, in these field offices, they're going in and doing exactly what we're doing with Carrie and our other lead teachers, district lead teachers, and our master teachers and folks like that. They've got that same level of support that they're putting out there.
The district has to make that first move. The district has to welcome.
Yeah.
And that's what he's talking about.
Yeah.
What we did, and we're a temporary district.
Yep.
Sometimes we wonder how we got that. I think it's due to how we did a full-blown PAC.
Mhm.
So we went away from teams, we did a PAC, and we had PLC. So these teachers, we went over the rubric for three or 4 months, even though we were going in and observing them. But that's so they could get their arms around,
Yep.
How they could improve. Just exactly what you were talking about. How they could improve. And we felt like that if they didn't know the rubric, they could not improve.
Right.
And therefore, you couldn't close that student achievement gap.
Yeah, and I think that that's the thing, because of the fact that this has been a part of our culture. I mean, especially if that's what you're asking. We start the year, every new teacher coming in spends 3 days in the summer, all day long, with these ladies doing nothing but studying the instructional rubric. But then, even going forward, in the school, every school for the month of August and September, every school has a plan for how they are going to build their capacity using the instruction. This is our instructional model. So it doesn't just become a part of a conversation that we talk about, well, when I'm evaluated. It now encompasses everything that we do. And so this language is just who we are, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it. A lot of it, I mean, like Johnson and the area universities are all doing a pretty good job of zeroing in on this as an instructional model. So really, to be honest with you, our younger teachers coming in struggle less with it than the teachers that had been teaching for a while, and the initial big struggle a lot of times came from folks that their practice was established under a different instructional TEAM or whatever model you want to point to, but a different time. And to make this shift was, for some, it was extremely difficult, but made it.
I agree, but I think the districts have got to pick that up.
Yep.
Even with those universities are doing a good job.
Right.
But what we've got to do in the district, the superintendent
Mhm.
on the leadership team, you've got to pick that up and still make that a focus. And it can't be a gotcha.
Right.
You've got to have a culture
Right.
where it's actually close that student achievement gap and to assist that teacher to make the
Right.
capacity. So
Absolutely.
many administrators, it's a gotcha
agree. And I think, again, too, you can look, in our district, just to give you an idea, over about 55% of our teachers are above expectations and significantly above expectations. And that's also using the growth score. The growth scores actually add to that. They help bump it up a little. We have 95+% of our teachers that are meeting expectations or above. And that lines up with the difference too that we're looking at is we go back and we look to see, does this line up with the results we're getting in the classroom? And that's the beauty of all this. It puts all of that together. So it's no longer separate. So you can't say, well, I've got great teachers and crappy scores. That the data doesn't show that students are making the growth. Yeah.
They calls attention to that individual score.
Yeah.
This shows people comparing the scores coming in down here. And you've got get a nasty letter or maybe a phone call from the State Department. Yeah.
We look at those outliers.
Okay, so as I get the PowerPoint, I want you to think your general impression. Would you say that lesson was at expectation or above expectation or below expectation? Just holistically, your general impression of that lesson. All right, now don't look around. Give me a thumbs up if you think it was above. If you figured it was right at expectation, give me a thumbs to the side, and a thumbs down if you thought it was below expectation. Well, based on the rubric. So I see some of this. Probably. Okay. So what we're going to do is dive into scoring a couple of indicators. Now, if I were actually going to score an evaluation like this, it would probably take me several hours to go through the evidence, categorize the evidence, and come up with a score, and then be able to prepare for the post-conference. We obviously don't have that time. So I'm going to divide you up and have you look at just 2 indicators of the instructional rubric, and each group will look at 2 different indicators, and then we'll kind of talk about it quickly, where we ended up, and we're not going to worry about that. So here's what I want you to do. Within your group, and I'll assign you what you want to do, you're going to look at the evidence that you captured. You're going to look at those 2 indicators on the instructional rubric. And then once you all have it, I want you to score it individually. So if I were working with Dr. Russell, both of us would look at our evidence separately, go through the rubric, and I would go ahead and write my score down, and he would write his score down. And then when we both have our scores, we're going to compare them and see what happens. So we want our scores to match as closely as possible. So if I said based on my evidence, I would assign this a 3, and he said based on the evidence, I would assign it a 2. Then we need to talk and see where are we falling in between that. And then when we're all done, we'll and just see how we do. So to make this work, I'm going to just assign you 2 indicators. So if you will look at standards and objectives and motivating students, it's the first 2. And then if you, gentlemen, will look at presenting instructional content and lesson structure and pacing. Should be the next 2. All right, I'm going to divide you guys up a little bit more, I think. Can I have the 2 of you look at activities and materials and questioning? And the 2 of you, would you look at academic feedback and grouping students? And then would the 2 of you care to work together and do teacher content knowledge and teacher knowledge of students? Just those 2. You're just going to score it, look at the evidence, score it by yourself based on the rubric, and then you'll compare and then come to a consensus. A lot of the videos that are coming out of NIET have a lot of Hispanic speaking students and teachers. I'm assuming a lot of them were videoed in a high minority school, but I'm not sure where it was. I don't think, based on what I know, I don't think it was specifically that. Yes. Right. Yes. We have nothing to let us think that that's the case. Yes. Good point. So you guys are doing lesson, teacher content knowledge and teacher knowledge of students, just those two. I'll just read this quickly. This is what they said. The National Rater said the teacher communicated to the students that the work they would do to develop a list of adjectives would be used to write a descriptive paragraph about the chart activity. She communicated the role of the adjective for describing any noun, person, place, or thing. And after describing the activity using the apple, she further explained that we could do this with any other noun. Sub-objectives were connected to the student prior knowledge. Expectations for student performance were clear, though not very demanding or high, and most students demonstrated mastery of the objective, which we don't know that based on where we were sitting. What about motivating students? 4. And your... Anytime you bring food, it is motivating, isn't it? The National Raters gave it a 3. So you just flipped around.
Are you sure you're not looking at?
I promise. Now here's one of the important things to remember. When we went through training, and this is what we've been told along the way, the goal is to never be more than one apart. So we're shooting to be, when you're calibrating with another person, the goal is always to be within one. Now, to take it to the next level, if you're getting certified to be an evaluator, you have to do that for your evaluation, but also when you add all the scores together, you can only have not even 1 point difference altogether between the total of the two.
0.9.
So it is a little bit trickier when you get to be that.
In order to learn that, though, you have to, it's almost like learning a different culture because you're distinguishing between regularly and usually.
Yes.
What's the difference in regularly and usually?
That's a good question. It's you just have to see it in practice. Honestly, there are times when I'm in a classroom and I don't have to question whether it was regularly or sometimes.
How much training or time did you guys have to put in just before you could meet that?
Okay, so as a classroom teacher, sure. We had a 2-day training to get started, a 2-day training.
And that's why I started out with, really use this instrument. It has to be something that becomes, you have to have a lot of practice with, not in the sense of just sitting around practicing, although you can. There's tons of videos, and you certainly can do that. So every single year, as an evaluator, you have to recertify. So you have to evaluate a lesson that is that's calibrated, and online, and then again, as I said, we do that regularly just throughout with the district. So that repetition, that coming back and viewing it with other people's eyes is just really critical in this.
Have a lot of candidates that as part of their internship, their principal some way have worked that where they are allowed to go to a training and they come out certified before they ever graduate. It's a lot like the career ladder program, those of us that served a year doing that.
Mhm.
You know, you had to keep doing it until you got it.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Who had presenting instructional content? What did you guys decide? Okay. And just just a little bit. You don't have to go deep into it. No apparent reason. Oh, you. She had visuals.
That, an example,
Mhm.
and well, we thought
Uh-huh.
logical sequencing.
Okay.
Evidence of that,
Right.
and we saw evidence of, well, that's it.
Okay. And so you're exactly right. And one of the things I want to point out with presenting instructional content, we would look at the modeling, and she did do a little bit of modeling of her expectation. but we're also looking for alignment. So one of the things that I always ask is, did her model align to what her objective was, which it did in this case. The national raters gave it a 4. So you're within 1. What about lesson structure and pacing? 4? Okay.
Gosh, I thought it took forever to pass stuff out. She should have had a bag of apples for each table.
Yeah, Carrie and I had that same conversation.
had
So
that same
Down
talk.
the times, it took
Yeah.
like 7 minutes just to pass out the apples.
I couldn't get past all the coughing and all the hands going into the
I-
seat.
Yeah.
So the national raters gave it a 3.
Oh, wait a minute, I think we did ours back.
Did you do it backwards?
I think we had 3 on the first and 4 on the second.
But Rodney and I had that conversation. I said her transitions are way slower than what I would expect to see. Yeah. Okay, activities and materials. Who had that? All right.
We gave it a 3 because looking at the rubric, it says includes most of the following, and it included.
most of the volume,
It
yeah.
included most of it. That one, the rubric is not a checklist, but that one is the close, yeah.
Most.
Yes.
Hey, you got it right.
You got it. I wish I had a prize for you. What about questioning? What did you decide for questioning?
We gave it 2.
Okay?
And the reasons we gave it 2. All lessons have to have Bloom's taxonomy developed
Right.
in the lesson.
That's right.
It was developed, but it was really at a lower level than the expectations. So we went with
Ooh, you guys got it going on.
Yep. National Rater said it too. All right. What about academic feedback?
Keep going, you go for it. Well, we were trying to decide between a 3 and a 4, and I think we went with a 3.
Okay. Anything in particular?
Well, she gave a good bit of feedback, but I thought that at times it was not specific academic feedback.
Yes. And she said good job.
She did. She said it.
I wanted to keep tallies because it was a lot. The National Raters gave it a 2. They said it wasn't specific enough to what she was wanting.
Well, that would be just exactly how I would do it in real life, because I probably bumped her up just a little.
And I've had a conversation, it says circulating, and so I think at times people have put priority on circulating, and I kind of noticed her doing it too. She walked a lot, but her circulation wasn't necessarily purposeful. She wasn't contributing and providing academic feedback, questioning. She was just circulating and repeating the same direction over and over and over. Yes. What about grouping? Who had grouping? Same people. Grouping?
We did. On the grouping, we went with a 4.
Okay. Any?
We're going to get scolded.
National Raters gave it a 2.
The reason we did was she had whole groups. I thought she let them stay there a little long. She had pairs, and she had ones presenting. So, that's 3 groups.
So remember when we started this, I talked about like with grouping, one of the things you look at is it purposeful? Is there a student reason for why they're grouping as they are? And so
That's what got her a 2.
Yeah, I can read this one since there's a pretty big difference. The reasoning behind this was the whole class lesson incorporated some work in pairs and independent written work. Though the routine of working in pairs seemed to be well understood by the students, it's unclear how the groups were varied in any way from day to day or how students were seated for pairs to enhance the objective of the lesson for each student. Higher levels of student responses may have been developed using intentional groups with assigned roles for developing group ideas and exposure to a variety of thinking. These groups could also have been used to analyze the solution from multiple perspectives.
Yes, but we had some additional information. She was the director's wife.
Oh, you're in the know. All right, we're ready.
Having grouping that's convenient, is that not a good thing to keep from having extra, confusion in a room? That we're going to group together because we're here.
I think it's okay sometimes, but not all the time.
And what, we don't know that maybe she didn't put, the brilliant student with the stupid student.
It's true. We don't know that from here. From what they did, they would have had a pre-conference, so they would have known that. Because one of the questions, right? One of the questions I ask in a pre-conference, how are you grouping your students and how do you decide on those grouping arrangements? So you're right, we don't have that knowledge to take
Right.
into it. What about teacher content knowledge?
We debated between the 3 and 4, and I think we settled on 3.
All right. National Raters decided it was a 3 as well. And what about knowledge of students?
We debated between a 1 and a 2, and we settled on a 2.
Okay. Why did you decide on a 1 and a 2?
What?
Because we talked about student interests and cultural heritage.
None of that was
None of
evident.
that differentiation instruction didn't happen.
Yes. So differentiation is the heavy one in that one. We're looking for differentiation. You know, sometimes cultural heritage may not play in. I think it could have played in on this one. But differentiation is the heavy hitter in this, and you're exactly right.
There was a 3 that happened, so that's why we put it at 2.
Yep.
Okay, us
National
four
Raters said it was a 2.
certified.
Now, thinking and problem solving, I didn't have you score. Those are a little bit harder to score. Thinking, the National Raters gave it a 2 for thinking because they didn't really go into analyzing anything. And then for problem solving, they gave it a 3. They assigned it a 3. This is one where I would have been between a 2 and a 3. And I see some people saying, yeah, I would agree with you. Okay, so this scoring is important, but as we conclude, I want to spend a little time on the post-conference because where we're talking about this being a growth model, we can't just stop at giving scores. And I think this is where TEAM is very powerful. I came out of the classroom, and I was a classroom teacher who was evaluated under TEAM the first year that it came into Knox County. And I had been evaluated under other models, and I felt like the feedback that I got from the post-conference out of TEAM was way different than anything I had received up until this point. And it gave me very specific guidelines for things that I could do to improve, which I appreciated as a teacher. So I'm going to give you 2 sheets. We're going to use them. We have like 12 minutes, so we're going to abbreviate as much as needed. If you'll just pass both of those down. In our post-conference, anytime we do a post-conference, the first thing is it has to be evidence-driven. So just like we said, we cannot put judgment statements into our evidence. In a post-conference, we can't make judgment statements either when we're talking with the teachers. We also identify one area of reinforcement and one area of refinement. And as a teacher, this was good for me because if you give me too much that I need to fix, I get overwhelmed. But within the team structure, we're really focusing on one thing that you did well, one thing that you can improve. And when you're identifying that as the evaluator, you're really looking for the biggest bang for your buck. So we have several areas over here that we scored as 2s. Which one of those, if that's what we think was the problem, which one of those was the one that really maybe caused the other problems? Is there one that if I improve that, I'll improve other things? And the same thing for the reinforcement. Was there something she did really well that helped in other areas? So those are the things we're looking for. And when we do these areas of refinement and reinforcement, we're only focusing on one descriptor. So I would not even say her area of strength was standards and objectives. I would go even further down into the rubric and I would say her area of strength may have been that she had evidence of mastery from all students. Okay, so I'm only focusing on one descriptor within that entire indicator. And it doesn't have to be her highest or lowest scoring one either. It really is, what do you think was a strength in the lesson? And if you could tweak one thing that would make the biggest difference in the mastery of that objective for students, what would that have been? And that's what you're identifying for your reinforcement. And we also do it based on coaching questions. So we don't go into a post-conference and say, this is your area of refinement, here's what you need to do to fix it. We want to get the teacher to reflect and get there as much as they can on their own. And so we're going to just go through this quickly based on that lesson you just saw. So first, if we're doing the reinforcement, and you'll see I gave you 2 things. The one that's got black and white stripes, dots, and all kinds of shapes on it, this is the post-conference planning sheet that I have created to work with the lead teachers and principals and administrators in my building. So this is not from the state. This is the format that we're taught in TEAM, but I put it in a more friendly way for my teachers to use it. So that, if you want to take notes, feel free to do that. So when we start a post-conference, the first thing I'm going to ask the teacher, no matter who the teacher is, as we begin to reflect, tell me one thing that you thought went well in that lesson. This is going to help me know what the teacher thinks her strength or his strength is. And it might align with what I identified and it might not. And if possible, I'm going to take what they said and question them to get them to where I want them to go. So what I want you to do, we're going to do a reinforcement on, there's a sheet of paper that has just the other one that I gave you, the boxes, and you're going to work with your partner again. In a post-conference, I would ask 2 to 3 self-analysis questions. Then I would name the reinforcement. So after I've questioned, I would name, okay, well, I pick standards and objectives as your area of strength, specifically this descriptor, and then I'm going to give evidence. And I could say, your mastery in this lesson was, you had 12 out of 15 students master the objective. You use this measurement tool as your measure of mastery. And then I'm going to tell them how they can continue to do this. And I love this piece, and sometimes it's left out, but I love it, especially when you're working with interns, because I was always the teacher who had interns in my class. And so I asked teachers, if you were working or mentoring with a first-year teacher, if you had an intern in your class, what would you tell them is the importance of doing this? And it kind of gives them a place to reflect on why this is even important to practice as a teacher. Does that make sense? So on the sheet that you have with your partner, you can look at the scores, and I don't care if you use the scores we came up with as a group or the National Raters group, but I want you to think, what was one thing that this teacher did well that you would identify as her area of reinforcement? There it is. And I'm going to give you 3 or 4 minutes for time's sake. If you have time, I want you to see if you could come up with, I said 3, let's do 1 coaching question that you would ask. And it could be as simple as, why is this important to the way that you do this in your classroom? How did this help your students? Anything like that. And then a piece or 2 of evidence that you would use to support your area of reinforcement. Does that make sense? All right, we're going to do 2 or 3 minutes. I'll circulate, answer questions. So you're identifying one area of strength from the lesson that you saw. And drill down to one descriptor. Okay. So yes. So it would be something like, how did you plan for the types of visuals you used in this lesson? Or how did the visuals that you used help in, you could say, why did you use those particular visuals? Anything like that.
How did the visuals you chose help with the students really grasping this comprehension?
When we go through the state training, anytime someone makes a judgment statement, someone beside them has to go, because it's hard to remove yourself at first.
So how do you comment on student behavior without making a judgment?
You have to go strictly based on what you've recorded in your evidence. So give me an example. What is her area of reinforcement that you've identified? Good, her one area of strength.
Managing student behavior. Some routines in place.
Mm-hmm.
Routines.
No, it took too long. She had a helper that seemed to know that she was supposed to help.
Okay, so you would say that there was evidence that routines had been established based on students knowing their roles or their, so that would be a piece of evidence. Yeah, that's exactly how you would say it. Okay, so let's come back together. Here's the great thing about picking an area of refinement and reinforcement. We may not always have the same one. And it's really about how you look at it and how you think that this teacher could greatly improve. So where I would say maybe she needed to, this was her strength. So if I said, well, maybe her strength was the fact that she had mastery of all her students master the objective, there may be another person who looked at it from a different angle and saw a different strength. So what did we identify? What did you guys identify as your area of strength? Presenting instructional content. Specifically, did you pick a descriptor?
Organization.
Okay, visuals and organization. What was yours? Exactly the same. So they picked the exact same thing. They said visuals under presenting instructional content. What did you guys decide? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so motivating students. And I would not say either of those was wrong. I think that was a strength in both ways. What did you guys decide?
Same thing.
Same thing. And then the last group? I think you looked at the environment rubric and you said managing student behavior. Yeah, so they looked at the environment. Yeah. All right, now let's look at the reverse side. So then we'll move into refinement. So we're identifying one area of strength. And then as I transition in, I would ask the same kind of question. As we continue to reflect, if you could teach the same lesson again, what might you do differently? Again, this is going to give me perspective as to what the teacher's already doing, because a lot of times we're our greatest critic. And the teacher could probably list 10 things in their mind that they didn't do the way they wanted to do. So this kind of gives me some perspective as the evaluator on what they're already thinking. I've already identified the refinement. That's not going to change. But what it is going to help me do is to make sure I'm asking questions to get them to where I want them to go. So, yes. Let me think where I started. The refinement and reinforcement will not change. So even if they say that one of the things they didn't do well isn't something you picked, you're not going to change yours. You're going to try to question them to get them to see why you picked that. And sometimes they just don't even realize that they didn't do it. You're going to do the same thing. 2 self-analysis questions. You're going to name that refinement for them, and then you're going to give them some evidence. Now, the difference on this is that we add an example for growth, which is really my recommendation. How are you going to improve this? We don't just want to name that you're doing this, maybe at a level that you could improve, but we want to say, based on this lesson, this is what it could have looked like if you had made this small tweak. And I like to use the word tweak. So based on this lesson, this is one thing you could have tweaked, and here's how it would look if you had done that. And we're going to leave that with them. All right, so let's just look at this. What do you think her area of refinement would have been? Thinking or questioning, and they go hand in hand. So had she increased the rigor of her questioning and maybe modeled out some more of her thinking process, it would have improved the thinking.
And I bet you with this teacher, I bet in the reflection, she probably was able to zero in on that as well. One of the things that, and you'll know this from working with your own students, if those who are really good at the self-reflection, they will ultimately be on this rubric. They will be your stronger teachers, the stronger scorers. I mean, that's a really important piece. And the other thing that you will see in this, those that are really, really weak, normally a real weakness will be the self-reflection. And I often use the term, incompetent people don't know they're incompetent.
They don't. Yes, absolutely.
And they will show that at this point. So when you are dealing with somebody who truly, this piece will always be a problem for them.
And then after you've identified that area of refinement, you've given them an example. So if ours was thinking or questioning, I could go either way. If I want to improve thinking, I would say to improve, to grow, next time you do your model, why don't you insert a think aloud with it and state the metacognition that's happening to help you make these decisions as you're filling out the graphic organizer. I want it to be something tangible that's specific to that lesson and could have helped that lesson, because we're not evaluating teachers on the whole, we're evaluating the lesson that we saw. Okay, and then to close the post-conference, we would do a closure. I like to ask this question: tell me about the area that we identified as your reinforcement and refinement, because I want them to repeat back to me what we've talked about. I don't want them to leave that room and not know what their strength and one way to tweak it would be. I want them to be able to communicate that back. And if they can't, then that tells me we need to talk a little bit more about it. And then at the end, I'm going to show them their scores. That doesn't come until the end, because we don't want the conference to be about the scores. We want the post-conference to be about growth. And if a teacher sees their scores and they are not the way they wanted them to look, immediately they shut down and are not ready to talk. They're ready to defend the scores. So that's the last piece. The scores do not change. With TEAM, the scores do not change. So if I've scored the evaluation, I've based it all on evidence, the teacher could disagree with me, but the scores do not change. They stay the same. And then, as Dr. Russell has said a couple of times, this is just the basic tip-top of the iceberg as far as training around the instructional rubric. And we're really just getting that beginning of understanding, starting with the procedural. And as you continue to work with the rubric and receive more and more training, you start to move more towards that conceptual understanding.
So we have a process that every one of our schools they actually assess themselves on this continuum at the beginning of the year. Well, actually in the summer. So they look at themselves, where are we as a school in our understanding? And so and we still have, even though we're well into this, we have some that are closer to the lower end of that continuum still. So in those situations, that dictates or that changes the way, one, that their PLCs address the instructional model, but it really changes what kind of training we do or the type of work they do in August and September moving toward this. So we've got some schools that what they're doing now in terms of preparation, it's such a part of their culture. What is the things that they're doing in practice with the model is very different than what we were doing at the start. They're not going to be doing like this kind of work or a PowerPoint where they're just covering different indicators. They're taking it much deeper into the results that they're seeing out of their students and looking at, okay, what do we need to change about our practice that's going to result in whatever instructional change that they're wanting to see happen. And so I want to thank you all for having us, and if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer those.
One thing that this really did for an administration at a conference wanted to know, what do you do? This year after year. You work. That's a big issue.
Well, let me tell you in Tennessee, just where we are with this, in Tennessee, if you are below expectations 2 years in a row, then for those that are coming on that have been tenured since 2011, it's automatic. They lose their tenure. the law is very, very clear. Efficiency is the newest piece it added into why a teacher can be terminated. And that would fit into the definition of termination. I mean, there is,
That's not being consistently implemented.
yeah, that's true. In districts, I think some districts they are. But if, we have, I think that you have to look at this stuff. Again, you have to use common sense to a degree, and you have to use professional judgment. So people you will have good teachers that will have a year where they're below expectations. Different things happen, they will have that. What we do not find is where you will have multiple years.